Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are opening a door that a lot of people, myself included honestly, usually prefer to keep double locked and barricaded.
Oh, yeah. Definitely barricaded.
We are talking about forgiveness.
Yeah.
And I have to be honest with you right off the bat, when I saw this topic on the schedule, my immediate reaction was just a hard wince.
I get that. It carries a lot of weight, doesn't it?
It really does. Because let's be real, usually when someone brings up forgiveness, it comes with a certain tone. It feels like a lecture.
Right. It's one of those words that tends to make people immediately cross their arms and lean back in their chair.
Exactly. It feels like I'm about to be told to be the bigger person, or that I need to just let it go for the sake of peace.
Mm.
And frankly, that often feels like code for stop making a fuss about the fact that you were hurt.
It feels dismissive.
Yes. It feels like losing. If I forgive someone who wronged me, aren't I basically saying, hey, it's fine, no big deal? Well, it absolutely was a big deal.
That is the most common resistance to the concept. We naturally equate forgiveness with excusing bad behavior. Or even worse, forgetting it happened at all.
Right.
We think it means reconciling with someone who might actually be dangerous or toxic. But the source material we are diving into today, a really profound text called The Blessing of Forgiveness, it completely dismantles that framework.
It really does flip the script because the first thing it does is it takes the morality out of it entirely. It doesn't frame forgiveness as something you do because you're some kind of saint.
No, not at all. It frames forgiveness as a physiological necessity. It moves way away from the sentimental greeting card version of the word and introduces a concept that I think changes everything. The text calls it a strategic release.
Strategic release.
Mm.
I love that phrasing so much. It sounds military. It sounds tactical. It doesn't sound like I'm hugging someone who stabbed me in the back.
That's exactly the point. The core argument here is that forgiveness is not about the other person at all. It is an act of internal sovereignty. It's about reclaiming the territory of your own nervous system.
Okay, let's unpack that. Because reclaiming your nervous system sounds great on a bumper sticker, but I want to understand what that actually means for you, the listener.
Mm.
If I'm sitting here seething about something that happened, say, 5 years ago, how is that a nervous system issue? I just think the guy's a jerk.
Well, the text uses a metaphor that is quite common, but then it takes it deep into the realm of biology. It calls unforgiveness an internal poison. You've probably heard the old saying, resentment is like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die.
Oh yeah, classic.
But the text gets into the weeds of our biology here. It says, when harm occurs, the body holds it. But what does that actually look like?
It isn't just a headache.
Right. It's that sudden tightness in your chest when you see their name pop up on your phone. It's the way your shoulders creep up to your ears. The source material describes a very specific sequence. First, anger tightens the muscles. It literally prepares you for a physical fight that isn't actually happening right now. Then, the resentment loops.
The loops. That is the part that really hit home for me. It's that 3 a.m. sensation. You're lying in bed, you're totally safe in your house, but your brain is relitigating an argument from 2018. You are thinking of all the clever things you should have said, and you can physically feel your heart rate going up just lying there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You aren't just remembering the event. Your body is reliving it. The text explains that this is a natural defense mechanism. Your brain is trying to learn from the threat so it doesn't happen again.
Right, it's trying to protect you.
But the problem arises when that state becomes permanent. The text has this great line, when resentment becomes identity, it begins to govern perception.
That is honestly terrifying. The idea that your anger could actually start wearing you like a costume.
It completely changes how you see the world, and physiologically, it keeps you in a state of high alert. The text mentions that unforgiveness dramatically increases vigilance. Your body is constantly scanning for threats, constantly braced for impact.
Yeah.
Imagine a home security system that is just blaring its siren 24 hours a day, even when the burglar has been gone for years. That takes a tremendous amount of energy to sustain.
So in this context, forgiveness isn't about saying I'm nice. It is a strict energy management strategy.
It is an energy retrieval strategy. The text says, unforgiveness binds you to the harm. Forgiveness returns your energy. It's about getting that mental bandwidth back. Think of your body like a computer with way too many high-power apps running in the background. Unforgiveness is that spinning wheel of death on your screen. It just eats up all your RAM.
Yeah, you can't process anything new because you're using 80% of your energy just holding onto that massive old file.
Precisely.
And so forgiveness is what? Force quit.
Forgiveness is force quit. It's the cooling fan finally spinning down. It is your body realizing it doesn't need to be ready to run a marathon or fight a tiger anymore. This is what the text calls regulation.
I really want to dig into that word regulation because we hear it a lot in therapy circles and on social media. But for the average person listening, what is the actual blessing of regulation?
The blessing isn't spiritual, it's mechanical. When you forgive meaning, when you release the need for the past to be any different than it was, the nervous system softens. The mind stops that endless looping replay. The body reduces its vigilance. You just stop scanning the room for enemies.
So you're essentially telling your body, the war is over. You can stand down, even if the person who hurt you never apologized.
Even if they are still a terrible person today, the war inside you ends. And that actually brings us to what I think is the most crucial and perhaps the most difficult distinction in this entire deep dive. The difference between what happens inside you versus what happens between you and the other person.
This was the part where I actually had to pause and reread the source material because it contradicts almost everything we are taught growing up. We usually conflate forgiveness with reconciliation. We think, well, if I forgive you, I have to let you back into my life. I have to trust you again.
And this text draws a hard line in the sand right there. It says, forgiveness is internal. Trust is external. They are completely separate.
They are separate. Okay, but play devil's advocate with me here for a second. If I say I forgive you, but I also say I never want to speak to you again, isn't that a contradiction? Doesn't that just mean it's fake forgiveness?
Not according to this framework. In fact, the text argues that might be the most authentic kind of forgiveness. It defines forgiveness as an act of sovereignty. It is you saying, I refuse to let this define my internal state, but, and this is the absolute key, it explicitly states that this does not mean access must be restored.
The list of things the text says you can still do while forgiving is wild. It says you can forgive and still set hard boundaries. You can forgive and completely cut contact. You can forgive and refuse reconciliation.
And my favorite one from that list, because it is so counterintuitive, you can forgive and still seek justice.
Yes, this is the one I really wanted to challenge you on. How does that work? How do you sue someone or press charges or get a restraining order and still claim you've forgiven them? Because to most people, serving someone court papers looks an awful lot like holding a grudge.
It definitely looks like that from the outside. But the text distinguishes between the action itself and the emotion driving the action. Think of it like a surgeon. A surgeon cuts people open. It's a violent act, technically. But they don't do it out of rage. They do it with a steady hand to fix a problem or remove a danger.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Right. The text argues you can pursue justice. You can set that boundary or file that lawsuit with the steady hand of a surgeon rather than the shaking hand of someone caught in a rage spiral.
That makes so much sense. So it's
Right.
the difference between fighting for justice because you are trying to destroy someone out of pure vindictiveness versus fighting for justice because it's simply the right thing to do to protect yourself or others.
Exactly. It is all about the internal temperature. Are you doing it with a calm nervous system, or are you doing it while your blood is boiling? If you let someone else's bad behavior keep you in a state of chronic anger, you have essentially handed over the keys to your kingdom. You are letting them drive. Forgiveness is taking the keys back. You might still drive to the courthouse, but you are the one driving.
I really like that distinction. It separates the practical steps from the emotional baggage. And there is always but the text also throws up a giant stop sign here. Because if we just say, okay, I'm sovereign, I'm releasing it, there's a massive risk of doing it too fast.
The no bypassing rule, this is critical. Live in a culture that loves a quick fix. We want to hack our way to peace and enlightenment. But the text warns that forgiveness cannot be forced without bypassing truth.
Meaning we can't just chant love and light while we're actually furious underneath.
Right. You cannot skip the processing phase. The text lists specific requirements that must be met before true resentment can loosen its grip. You have to acknowledge that the harm was real, that the pain was real, and that the impact actually mattered.
Why is that acknowledgement so vital? Why can't I just decide to be over it, fake it till you make it?
Because the body keeps the score. If you don't acknowledge the reality of the harm, you aren't forgiving. You are just denying. You're repressing. And denial takes energy. just like resentment does. The text says only after truth is faced can resentment loosen. You have to deeply validate your own experience first.
It's validation. It's looking at the wound and saying, yeah, that is a massive cut and it hurts like hell, instead of pretending it's just a tiny scratch.
Exactly. And because of that, the text notes that sometimes forgiveness is immediate, but sometimes it takes years. And that is perfectly okay. The speed of the forgiveness doesn't validate the act. The reality of the process does.
There is another concept in there about memory that I found really helpful, because people always say forgive and forget, but the text says absolutely not.
Forgiveness is not forgetting. The text is very clear on that point. It says forgiveness does not erase the memory, it removes hostility from the memory.
I really like the way it phrases the result. It says the event transforms from an open wound into information.
That is a profound shift to make. Think about an open wound on your arm. If anything touches it, even a gentle breeze, your whole body screams in pain. That's what an unprocessed trauma is like. But once it heals into a scar, it is just information. You can look at it. You can tell the story of how you got it. You can remember to be careful around sharp objects. But it doesn't hijack your nervous system anymore.
It becomes a file in the archive rather than a fire in the living room.
Beautifully put, it moves from active RAM to long-term storage.
So we've built this robust framework for dealing with the villains in our lives, the people outside of us who cause harm. But the text points out a massive loophole. What happens when the villain is you? What happens when the person you cannot forgive is the one looking back in the mirror?
Self-forgiveness. And the text suggests this is often much harder than forgiving others.
I think we all feel that instinctively. But why is it harder? Why are we so much worse at letting ourselves off the hook?
Well, practically speaking, you can't get away from yourself. With another person, you can set a boundary, you can block their phone number, you cannot block your own internal monologue. You are stuck with the perpetrator 24/7.
Oof, that is painfully true. It's like living with a roommate who just constantly follows you around, reminding you of your worst mistakes.
And the text outlines a similarly stringent process for self-forgiveness. It requires admitting error, really owning it, not making excuses or blaming circumstances. It requires accepting the consequences. But then, and this is the part we really struggle with, it requires refusing endless self-punishment.
Refusing endless self-punishment. That implies that at some point the punishment actually has to end. I think a lot of us feel like if we stop punishing ourselves, we're letting ourselves get away with it. Like if I stop feeling guilty, it means I'm a bad person. The guilt proves I have a conscience.
That is the ultimate trap. We think the suffering is the payment. We think if we feel bad enough for long enough, it somehow balances the cosmic scales. But the text calls this out as a form of vanity. It distinguishes between shame and repair. It says shame paralyzes, repair liberates.
Let's break that down for everyone. What does that paralysis look like versus repair?
If you are drowning in shame, you are focused entirely on yourself. I'm so bad. I'm a monster. I can't believe I did that. You aren't actually fixing anything out in the world. You're just staring at your own reflection and hating it. It is entirely self-absorbed. Repair is different. Repair says, I broke this. That was wrong. How do I fix it? And how do I ensure I never do it again?
So shame is sitting in the mud crying about being dirty, and repair is getting up and going to wash the clothes.
Precisely. And the text argues that without self-forgiveness, personal growth stalls completely. Because if you are using all your energy to beat yourself up, you have absolutely no energy left to change your behavior.
So self-forgiveness is actually a prerequisite for becoming a better person. It's not a get-out-of-jail-free card. It is the actual work required to stop going back to jail.
Absolutely. It frees up the energy you need to make different, better choices next time. Which leads us perfectly to the outcome, the payoff of all this. If we do this work, if we regulate our nervous system, separate trust from forgiveness, face the truth, and stop punishing ourselves, what do we actually get out of it?
We get freedom from repetition.
This was easily the most hopeful part of the source material for me. The text says, when you forgive, you reduce the likelihood of recreating the same dynamic.
And it clarifies something important, not because the other person changed. They might still be the exact same mess they always were, but because you changed.
That goes right back to the idea of the open wound versus information. If I have processed the painful event into solid information, I can use that information moving forward. I can spot the red flags a lot earlier. I can enforce the boundary sooner. I am not reacting blindly out of trauma. I am acting out of wisdom.
If you are stuck in that loop of resentment, You are often unconsciously re-engaging with the exact same types of people or situations, trying to get a different result. You're trying to win the old war.
Exactly. You are trying to fix the past by replaying it in the present. When you forgive, you finally end the war. You step off the battlefield. You decide that the past is unchangeable, and therefore you stop trying to change it.
And that is the very definition of liberation in the text.
Yes. The blessing of forgiveness is not that the past disappears. It is that it stops controlling the present.
It stops controlling the present. That is huge. It means you can actually be here right now instead of being tethered to something that happened 10 years ago. It's about being fully present in your own life.
It restores your capacity for forward movement. And that is why the text insists that forgiveness is not sentimental. It is deeply practical. It is a tool for survival and adaptation. It's about energy conservation and strategic positioning.
It's almost like unclogging a drain. If the drain is clogged with hair and gunk from 5 years ago, the water today cannot flow. Forgiveness is just pulling out the gunk so the water can flow again.
That is a very visceral analogy, but yes, it works perfectly. It clears the blockage so life can resume.
So let's bring this all back together. We have covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, and it is pretty heavy stuff.
It really is. To recap the main points, we are totally redefining forgiveness. It is not about the other person. It is not about trust, reconciliation, or forgetting. And it is definitely not about being a doormat.
It is a strategic release of internal poison. It's about getting that poison out of your system so it stops making you sick.
It is a physiological act of regulating your nervous system so that you aren't living in a constant state of chronic vigilance and tightness. It's force quitting the app that's draining your mental battery.
And it requires facing the truth of the harm, not bypassing it with toxic positivity. You have to admit it hurt before you can ever heal it.
And it applies to you, too. You have to stop the endless self-punishment if you want to actually grow. You have to purposefully choose repair over shame.
And ultimately, it's about sovereignty. It's about deciding that you are the one in charge of your internal state, not the person who hurt you.
Which is the ultimate power move, really. To look at a situation that was meant to break you or define you and say, I see this, I acknowledge the pain, but I refuse to let it run my life.
It completely turns the narrative from I am a victim of this thing to I have processed this thing and now I am moving forward.
The event becomes information. That is the key takeaway for me.
It's incredibly powerful stuff. And honestly, it definitely changes how I look at those old grudges I'm holding on to. It makes me realize that by holding on to them, I'm really just holding myself hostage.
You're keeping your own system on red alert for a threat that has already passed. You are guarding an empty castle.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with a thought. We talked about how unforgiveness is a loop, a repetition, a reliable way of staying stuck.
We have. And the text challenges us to break that loop.
So here is the question we want you to walk away with today. If you are currently holding on to a resentment, really polishing it, keeping it sharp, replaying it at 3 a.m., ask yourself this. Is holding on to this actually keeping you safe?
Or is it ensuring that you stay trapped in the very dynamic you are trying to escape?
Is it protection or is it prison?
Something to think about.
Thanks for diving in with us. We'll see you next time.